Welcome to the Sooners 360 Recruiting Podcast, a podcast for OU recruiting fans by Sooners 360. Each week we catch you up on the latest in OU recruiting news and provide opinions and evaluations on all things OU football recruiting. I'm Chris Mason, lead recruiting analyst for Sooners 360. This podcast is now sponsored by Sooners 360 on Patreon. To support this podcast, please go to patreon.com/Sooners360817 and click subscribe. It's only $2 a month, and there's also a free trial option, and that's where I'm posting all of my online recruiting content. The link is also in the show notes. Also, this podcast is now part of the Believe podcast family. Every team, every topic, everywhere. I'm also appearing on the Horns Down podcast YouTube channel discussing OU season, along with Chris with the K and Jason Watkins from the Hall of Fame podcast. Please like and subscribe to the 360 YouTube channel, and you'll be notified of the live broadcasts, and you'll also be able to find archives of those shows. We're having some good content, had a really good recruiting discussion about OU's quarterback situation last week. If you want to listen to that, it was because Jason Watkins has had a chance to talk to Jaden O'Neill recently, interview him. So we had a really great discussion about that. And along with some other things about OU recruiting. So please keep an eye out for those multi-podcasts from Jason, Chris, and I. So this is episode 127, new D-line commit and June visits looming. To the recruiting news. First big news since I did the last broadcast last week. Right before Memorial Day weekend on Friday, Brian Harris from Jacksonville, the defensive tackle I've talked about in recent podcasts, has committed and talked about on Patreon, on the Patreon account quite a bit. He has committed to OU. He's about 6'4", 285, 290 pounds. He plays defensive end and defensive tackle in high school. His stats are limited number of tackles, 29 tackles last year. He moved to Florida from Philadelphia last year, so he's kind of new on the Florida scene a little bit. He had 29 tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss, and 4.5 sacks. So extremely productive based upon in terms of his impact from a small number of tackles. He was the Rivals defensive lineman camp event in Florida, MVP, which blew up his recruiting a little bit. He was initially committed to Maryland, decommitted, and then he chose OU out of a list from Alabama, Penn State, Michigan, and South Carolina, which that's a really strong group in my opinion. South Carolina has a litany of defensive linemen in the NFL, doing a good job with their defensive line, as we saw last year in Norman. Penn State's been doing a fantastic job with their D-line and defensive recruits in general, as has Michigan. And obviously Alabama has been sort of the de facto standard for D-line for the last 15 years. So beating those guys for Harris, I think, is a clear example of that. He's rated a 4-star by one service, by Rivals, who obviously saw him at that camp event. But he's flying under the radar a little bit with the other services. I'd anticipate him jumping into a top 200, maybe even a little higher once folks get a chance to see his senior film and see him at work. His film is very good. He's not always making tackles in his highlight reel, but he is so disruptive and blowing up plays. And his defense around him is really pretty good. They have a lot of good pursuit, good speed. So when he blows up a running play, the running back has to just completely change direction and is running into another defender for a tackle for loss. So when you don't see, and when he blows up an interior pass rush on a quarterback, somebody else is making the sack because he's just driving the quarterback into the defensive end's path or into a blitzer. So when you watch him, he's consistently in the opponent's backfield, blowing plays up, with a serious burst and movement. A little raw in terms of some aspects of defensive line play. If you hear Gabe talk about him or anybody else of the of the technical guys, they'll say he's playing too high, his pad level's too high. Of course, it seems like Gabe says that about every offensive lineman and every defensive lineman. So I sometimes wonder if anybody has a good pad level in high school. But that's a whole other rant, another direction. But we know what Todd Bates does with raw defensive talent. He coaches it up, he develops it year over year. The players get better, and they become effective, draftable defensive linemen. You give him elite tools, he's going to craft players out of them as long as the players buy in. Parker Thune on OU Insider posted a very good video, very good interview with Brian right after he signed. Obviously, they had embargoed that and did that interview prior to him committing publicly. In the video, Brian Harris declared that he'd told Coach Bates 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks prior to his public commitment, that he was going to OU. So he chose OU off one unofficial visit only. When he announced that he was going to commit kind of a week before, I thought OU was kind of out of it because usually OU makes their run on guys in June. We'll get to that storyline here on this podcast, but I thought OU was out of it. But Bates just did a great job selling him. It's a very similar story to Trent Wilson from the Maryland area, who the freshman early enrollee defensive tackle, who I think is just an elite 3 tech. And I think Harris could be that, but also has a bigger frame. Harris could easily be 6'4", 310, 315, and basically play either defensive line position and just wreak havoc in the SEC. But Harris did a really good interview, talked about he committed early, that OU was the place he fell in love with, talked about the guys that he wanted to recruit and was interested in and wanted to be a presence in the class. And since then, OU has bumped him to June 20th, and I'll talk about that in a little bit in the podcast. So that's the positive recruiting news. Again, if you're subscribed to my Patreon, you've seen the profile and the way I talk about Brian and all that. So that information's all out there on the Patreon site if you want to have a slightly deeper read into what I think about Brian Harris and what his potential could be. In other commitment news, OU has lost out on Keenan Harris, linebacker from the St. Louis area, to Missouri. Technically, he still has an OU visit. I don't think that OU visit's going to happen, but it's certainly possible. But he's committed to Missouri, so it looks like he's off the board. So that's it for sort of the updates on commitment stuff. We have a whole bunch of recruiting news from prospect. We're getting closer to June visits. The June visits are looming. This is the last weekend where OU sort of sits on the sidelines. It'll be last weekend. Some schools had official visitors over Memorial Day. OU didn't. OU won't have anybody in town this weekend, but the next weekend is when OU kicks off. So it's kind of like one weekend left to kind of worry about what's going on and who they might lose out on. And then OU starts their official visits, and it's OU's recruiting offensive begins. So we have one last little portal note, and I was completely not anticipating this, but Gavin Frakes, a 6'4", 230-pound QB who's from Norman originally, has transferred to OU. Frakes has previous starter experience at New Mexico State and provides a 5th quarterback to the OU QB room. So I don't know what all that means. I presume he's a walk-on, just wants to get back home and enjoy a final season. But if for some reason OU needs experience, backup help in practice or in something else, they've added just another piece to the quarterback room. All right, let's just recap the Bo Bentley situation real quick. So first off, Bo Bentley has been chosen for the National Elite 11 competition held in LA this July. Jaden O'Neal didn't get an invite, but Bo Bentley did. I don't know how to interpret that. I don't know what they're using as their criterion. Second, he's flip-flopped his last 2 official visits. So LSU is now this weekend coming up. And then OU is now June 6th. And I imagine after the OU visit, we're going to get a quick answer from Bo Bentley. He seems like a kid that is ready to end this recruiting odyssey and get it over with and start moving on to help people recruit. So does this help OU? It's hard to tell. It's never a bad shot to get the last shot. Sorry, it's never a bad thing to get the last shot at impressing a recruit, provided you get that last shot. So if he goes to LSU, loves it, commits and cancels the OU and then just takes the OU visit, that's probably not a great thing. But if he comes out of the LSU visit still open-minded, I kind of think that this leans in OU's direction based upon their longer experience with Bentley and more touch points. So we'll see what's going on there. And then another quick recap. Tight end recruiting. We actually have good tight end recruiting news again. Tyler Ruxer, the 6'4", 220-pound tight end with a 4.6 40 time, has moved up, has bounced someone from a visit, and has scheduled his OU official visit for June 6th. I think OU's in a great spot for him, and he could be on commitment watch after that visit. Just a reminder, he had a huge junior year with 43 catches and nearly 900 yards receiving, and he blocks well. You add him to Ryder Mix, and you have two excellent, true tight ends who you can leave on the field no matter what you're doing. So that could come through for OU, so let's just see where that goes. I have another interesting tight end note in a second. Not sure what to do with that either. So OU has also recently offered 2026 running back DeZephon Walker from Missouri. He's a 5-star, 5'11", 205 pounds. And another in a trend that will continue in this podcast, he's bumped a team and has moved his and has officially set up a visit for OU on June 6th. OU's obviously playing catch up a little bit here, but Walker seems in interviews very enamored with both DeMarco Murray and the OU running back tradition. Anytime someone his age is mentioning Adrian Peterson, that is a good sign for OU. Another visit that's been moved up and changed is Matthew Nelson, the 6'5", 220-pound defensive end from Arkansas, the track star who runs a 60-meter hurdles, which is just crazy at his size. He's a teammate of new OU verbal Ja'Cory Smith, because Ja'Cory Smith has changed high schools and now attends Matthew Nelson's high school, whereas last year he attended the same high school as Amarian Robinson. So a little confusing, but Ja'Cory Smith is kind of your connection from Amarian to Nelson. So, and now he's coming in June 6th. I think there's a high possibility of a verbal commitment here. Ignore the unranked status. This is a kid who has a absurd ceiling. He can be 6'5", 245, no problem, running like a 4.6, basically your elite NFL type measurables, and has all kinds of potential to be a fantastic defensive end. And I think with OU's defensive end depth that they've kind of been building, and maybe building more so in this class, they would have the chance to let Nelson develop a little bit. Another recent offer who has now set up a visit is 2026 defensive tackle T-Ron Richardson from Virginia. He's 6'5", 285, and he's basically a bigger defensive tackle version of Nelson. Raw, but absurd physical traits, unreal ceiling for him, massive frame. He could easily be 6'5", 315 with those with that ability, with that burst and mobility still maintained. He's again, lowly ranked, but it's all frame, it's all measurables again with him. So, and he'll be on campus June 6th. OU's got big weekends June 6th and June 20th, as you'll hear from the notes I'm giving you. Then Jaden Petit, a wide receiver from Florida that 6'4", 210, 4-star on Rivals. He's been on the background at wide receiver a little bit. Looks like OU is more in this battle than I had thought. He visited OU unofficially. He's now got an official visit for June 6th. OU's in a fighting battle there with some other SEC powers. Then another new recent offer, Devon Robinson, an offensive guard from Pasadena, Texas, which is just outside Houston. He's 6'3", 315. He's already set up an official visit for 620. He looks like he could be on commit watch as well. I love this kid on film. I don't know why it took so long to offer. He's just mauling, mashing kids from the offensive guard position, and this looks like a great evaluation late offer by Nagy and Bill Bedenbaugh. Another new offer who does not have a visit right now, but I think one's coming up. It is Ryan Estrada, the running back from El Paso. He's listed as 5'11", 195 in a couple of services. He's also listed as 5'9", 180 on some other services. So, I don't know, let's split the difference, call him 5'10", 185, 190 pounds. On film, he looks unreal with serious home run speed. I think the first 10 highlights I watched were 65-yard runs or longer. And then the next highlight was a wheel route pass of about 65 yards. His speed is serious. OU has not signed a player from El Paso in a while, hitting my Sooner cabal of older Sooner fans. We believe Tom Backus in either 1989 or 1990 during the Gibbs days is the last. Tom Backus, a defensive tackle from El Paso, Texas, is the last El Paso player that OU signed. So Estrada's stats last year were just silly. 2,400 yards, 32 TDs, and a 14-yard per carry average. They weren't force feeding him the ball. He averaged, something like, his average carries per game were something like 14, 15. And he was averaging about, nearly 200, 180, 190 yards rushing a game. So it wasn't like they were feeding him 30 carries a game to get to this stuff. He was just blowing by folks. All right, now to maybe the most interesting offer story of the last couple of days. And it just happened right before I recorded. I'm recording this late Tuesday night, May 27th. OU has offered Josiah Jefferson from a high school ball in California, playing in a JUCO out west. Now, he's Tony Jefferson's brother, and it kind of weirdly started with Tony Jefferson talking about his brother and saying, "Hey, OU, why didn't you recruit my brother?" Which then led to Jim Nagy and Tony having a conversation, which Nagy posted on Twitter. Great conversation with Tony Jefferson. And then 2 days later, after the weekend, OU offers Josiah. Now, he's now 6'5", 230. His film from JUCO looks really pretty good. He's bulked up from high school, where I think he was like, 6. He was small, and he's grown a little bit. I think he was like 6'4", 195 pounds, wide receiver out of high school. He's now bulked up at JUCO, and he looks to be in fantastic shape based upon what he's been posting on Twitter. So the question I have is, it's not clear to me if Josiah could be a late enrollee for 2025 or if he's a 2026 recruit. And it all really depends if I have my facts straight on JUCO departures and all that stuff. Those rules could all be out the window. But the way it used to work was, if he was a full qualifier out of high school, he does not need to graduate from junior college. And I don't know if he was. I've never heard of this name prior to a week ago when Tony said, "Hey, you should get my brother." But I can tell you on film, he's interesting enough and athletic enough that he got an OU offer, and it wouldn't surprise me if we didn't hear that if he can be, that he wasn't in Norman quickly as an additional boost to the tight end room. Now back to some targets that we've been talking about and some updates here. So OU target Drew Evers, the offensive lineman from the Dallas area, 6'4", 290, plays offensive tackle, probably plays guard or center in college. I don't think his wingspan's big enough to allow him to play outside still, but we'll see. Has posted a final six of SMU, Penn State, Oklahoma, LSU, Ohio State, and A&M. I think OU is somewhere in the mix for Evers. SMU's been making a big push for Dallas area players. Obviously, OU's taking some hits there. Ohio State at one point was making a heavy push. I don't know if they've gone in some other directions with some other offensive linemen. I don't think LSU's in play. A&M is probably the other school that would make the most sense for Evers. Evers obviously has been to OU's campus, 12 times in the last 4 years. His brother obviously signed with OU, then left. The family obviously felt like that was a Levy problem, not an OU problem. So we'll see what goes on there. OU's got other offensive guards coming in for official visits. I just mentioned, I think the new guy, Devon Robinson from Pasadena, is in the mix and is probably going to commit. And they've already got Will Conroy committed inside. So we'll see where things go with OU's interior offensive lineman commitments. OU defensive target, Tavion Branch, who I've talked about a bunch, 6'4", 285, 295, from Pennsylvania. Had a fantastic showing at the Under Armour event in New Jersey. Branch had great reps at the event and is likely to move up in the rankings again. I think Penn State and Rutgers have been looking at him at offensive line, and OU's been just dead focused with Todd Bates telling him they want him at D-line. And that's where Branch would prefer to play. And it looks like folks are starting to realize that his athleticism, length, and size are better used on the D-line. And OU may have grabbed a little bit of a lead here just off that recruiting approach, focusing on D-line only and focusing and realizing that's where he really wants to play. So he's visiting OU in June. I think it's June 6th. So that should be another guy that could be on commitment watch, I think, after his OU visit. Then a wide receiver target from Georgia, Milton, Georgia, Craig Dandridge. He's 6 foot, 180 pounds, just a speedster, kind of very much Elijah Thomas looking like wide receiver. He's down to a final six of Tennessee, OU, Georgia Tech, UGA, Stanford, and UF. OU gets their visit shot in June. If I had to guess, this is likely an OU, UGA, and UF battle. Not sure where he's really leaning. And then back to Florida defensive line action. OU target and defensive end outside linebacker DeAnthony Lafayette. He's 6'1", 230, 235, 16 and a half sacks, bunch of tackles for loss, kind of your Nick Benito, R. Mason Thomas type player. He's shifted his official visit to the 20th, and now he'll be visiting along with Brian Harris, who we just talked about, and OU's big-time defensive end target from IMG, who used to be from the Orlando area as well, Jake Krull. So OU could end up with 3 Florida defensive linemen, and those 3 guys could all be on the same visit weekend, June 20th. In other recruiting news, Celesi Moa, the Utah safety elite athlete, has scrubbed his OU visit. That recruiting is obviously over, unfortunately. Would have liked to have seen OU at least get him on campus for a visit, because just a very extremely talented kid. So OU's made several new offers for 2027. The first, we'll just go in order here. Jaden Dean, a four-star offensive lineman from Miami St. Thomas Aquinas. OU's offering a lot of kids from there, recruiting a lot of kids from there. So they're making another 2027 offer to that school. Gene is ranked by Rivals as a four-star top 150 player in the nation. Then OU offered a California wide receiver from Palisades, DeMar DeZern. He's 5'11", 170 pounds, wide receiver, ESPN top 100 four-star. And everyone's wondering, well, I thought OU wasn't recruiting smaller wide receivers. They are when they have 10-3, 100-meter speed. And that's what DeZern is listing on his Twitter profile. Then OU offered for 2027 from Mississippi defensive tackle Jamarcus Pittman. He's 6'5", 295. He might be the best defensive tackle in the country, not named OU target Jalen Brewster. He's ranked number 32 in the nation by 247. I watched his film, and it was like a 5-clip offer kind of film. He's just massive, absurdly quick, absurdly powerful. Bates hasn't been able to really lock down a Mississippi or Georgia or Alabama defensive tackle yet. I'd love for him to break through and get Pittman. Then OU offered from the Los Angeles area 2027 defensive tackle Elijah Harmon. He's had a huge spring camp season, has offers from everyone. His rankings haven't really reflected that yet. He's ranked in the top 150 by 2 services. He'll probably end up in the top 100 by almost everybody. He's a very quick 3-tech, probably could play at 6'4". And, the weight would just have to depend upon the speed, quickness versus weight trade-off that OU, has to make with players like Grayson Holton or David Stone, where they don't have to make a trade-off. They can just push David over 300 pounds, and he's still that mobile and quick. But with some other players, they get him too heavy, you're losing that burst or what makes them special. And then OU offered Bryant Robinson, a DB from Frisco Lone Star. He's a teammate of OU Verbal Rider Mix and OU target Davion Gross. He's a 4-star top 250 player by Rivals. And the last bit of news for 2028, Rydell Waddle, I think I'm saying that right. I mean, that's kind of tough. He's a 6'4", 200-pound linebacker from Poto, has been invited to the elite OU camp. And he's started to get P4 offers. They're starting to float in for him. So people are becoming aware of who he is. I just watched his freshman year film, and it's very good for a freshman. And he's got a long physical frame. He could easily be 6'4", 230, and as mobile as he is right now. So I think OU is priming the pump for the OU offer. Like, they want to get him in the camp setting, and then they'll pull him aside, and Venables will make the offer in person. OU likes doing that. It's effective. And for a 2028 kid, OU waiting, a couple of weeks until they can see him in person and make that offer in person that's all good as far as I'm concerned. All right, that's the barrage of news over the last 5 or 6 days. Again, OU no visits this weekend, but we'll probably hear more about official visits. Probably have a couple of names drop off, and the biggest thing to watch will be news on news from the LSU camp, that if it leaks, about where they are with Bo Bentley. So thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your audio podcast platform of choice. Don't forget to leave a rating. Please subscribe to the podcast on YouTube on the Sooners 360 channel and give us a thumbs up. That also helps us algorithm-wise. It just helps us in general. And finally, please visit patreon.com/Sooners36817 to subscribe for more recruiting content and to support this podcast and keep this podcast free for everyone. Thanks, and I'll have another podcast out after the visits that occur this weekend. Thanks, everyone.